repeat the non-conformist oath. I promise to be different. I promise to be unique. I promise not to repeat things other people say.
Welcome back to Positive Blatherings, the podcast about positivity, where I blather with someone and we really have no direction. We just have a conversation and I try to get to know that person and how they've been running their lives as it comes, with positivity in mind and using positive practices. And this gentleman who I have on the show today, I noticed really early on in during the pandemic, and he had the coolest videos that he was doing. And it was really a great escape from what was going on. And I'm pretty sure that's why he was doing that. Ted Baumhauer's here today. How you doing, Ted?
Good morning. I'm doing fine.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad to have you here. I know you're kind of like, what? When I asked you to be on the show, you're like, what? Why me? What's going on? You're a performer. You're a jack of many trades that I could see. And you from a personal perspective, you really made a difference early on in my pandemic experience.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I really like to learn more about how you got on that path and, how you became a performer and some of your mentors and things like that. And how you obviously went straight into that pandemic with a positive attitude. And I'd like to learn more about that and what makes you that kind of a guy.
Yeah. Well, what other choice do we have?
That's, that's a valid point.
Yeah. Well, I am a juggler. I came to juggling late in life, and I discovered it because I was a speaker and doing presentations on leadership and team building and those kinds of things. And I saw a presenter by the name of Randy Judkins back in 94. And I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. He just had the audience completely in the palm of his hand, a couple hundred administrative assistants. And so I went about the process of learning how to juggle. And then one thing led to another with circus arts. And so last year, when everybody was stuck at home and I was stuck at home, I'm lucky enough to have a place that I can go juggle in my house.
Yeah, because not too many people, have a place to juggle.
Yeah. I so outkicked the coverage when I met my wife. We actually built the house, and we're lucky enough to do that. And when we met with the architect, one of the first things she said to him was, "My husband juggles, and he's going to need a place to do that." I mean, how lucky am I?
And yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that the person was like, that's the first time I've ever heard that.
Probably. Although I have, I can't remember how many years ago, there was a brief article about juggling cribs. And that was before I had one. So I was like, wow, I have crib envy,
Oh, I was thinking you were juggling like children's cribs. I'm like, how the heck would you do that? Yeah, I see what you mean. Like cribs.
Yeah.
Your pad, your
place to go. So
I'll get there.
Yeah, that's all right. So I was lucky enough to have a place. And since I was juggling every day, and it's not a new idea that I had. I've seen several of my friends and other jugglers that I know have put up when they turn like 32. They'll do 32 tricks by a juggler. So I thought, I'm not doing anything else, and I've got an iPad, and I've got a place. So I just started recording different tricks every day, and one thing led to another. And I stopped at 101 just because, all right, that's a good...
That's a good number.
Yeah, it's a good odd round number.
Did you do them every day, or did you do them every couple of days, or...
At first, I did them every day, and then I started...
I seem to remember that.
Yeah, then I started... I posted one every day, but I would record maybe 3 or 4 in a day, and then post them out one at a time. There was some, as I'm sure you can imagine, I put music to it, and at first, I was just putting the same music because I wasn't paying attention to it, and then somebody mentioned it and went, oh yeah, I guess I do have options. So it was sort of a learning process.
Yeah. Juggling is one of those things that I think a lot of people take for granted as a real skill. Maybe I'm wrong, but you don't hear about let's see, when you're talking about the performing arts and stuff, and it's like, well, someone says they can juggle. It seems like if you go back, there's a lot of entertainers that they all could juggle. Like that was their first thing, like, oh yeah, like you see Steve Martin, he starts juggling, and Kevin Kline, he started juggling. And I'm like, what is everybody in entertainment? Do they start off as a juggler? And which I know is not true. But it is really freaking hard to juggle. I can't do it. At what age did you start juggling?
36.
36. Get out of here.
Yeah, I was late. I was late to the game.
That's impressive as hell, though.
Well, thank you.
You can start at 30. I can't start anything. The only thing at 36 I was able to do is I wasn't able to do anything. I was done. I was done learning.
Doubt that.
Yeah.
I doubt that. It's more a matter of will, I think, than I mean, there is certainly a certain predisposition to an athletic skill involved in it.
Sure.
At this point, I've taught thousands of people to juggle, and I've seen thousands of people taught juggling. I've only seen like one person that, after 3 weeks of 1-hour lessons each week, was just not going to get it. And she's a very good friend of mine. She was my administrative assistant up in Vermont.
Really? So that's a pretty impressive percentage of success that you have in teaching juggling. So do you have a special way that you teach, or is it just you believe that if given enough time to practice, just about anyone can do it?
I think just about anyone can do it. And there are certain tips and tricks to it in terms of breaking things down. And I had people teach me how to do it. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned was how to break tricks down and put them back together so that you can learn anything you want, even if you don't have a teacher. But, I think most anybody can do it. The question is, why would you want to? Juggling is, as you said, a lot of performers used to do it. It's a gateway to performing because it's like, hey, look at me. That's such an attraction, right? Jugglers have to find something else to be interesting.
Right. I can see that. For me personally, I would love to just be able to bust out juggling one day. Just, hey, I have a buddy that's like that. A guy I used to work with at the radio station, Jim Sidoti. He was, a budding actor, and he was trying to, do all this stuff in film and theater and everything. And we're sitting there one day, and there were three little, it was like one of those radio games, you throw the balls and stuff, and there was a couple of balls there, and he just started juggling. I'm like, what? When could you started juggling? He's like, oh yeah, I learned this a few years ago and stuff. I was tempted to just throw things in it. Can you do that when people throw something in it, you grab it and incorporate it?
To a point. We can take care of that. I can definitely teach you how to juggle. I didn't bring any of my stuff today, but in terms of teaching folks, I have ways of doing it, but really you have to see where the person's starting from.
Yeah.
I have found juggling to be this deep and rich metaphor, and I'm a leadership trainer by trade, and I use it a lot, or those kinds of skills. So part of teaching somebody and being a mentor is you can't teach them where you're comfortable. You have to meet them where they are.
Right.
So I still think we could teach Carolyn how to juggle. I still think that's possible if she really, really wanted to, which is a bad joke, but... How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? One, right? But yeah, has to want to change.
Right. So you brought up your career as leadership trainer. And I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, and you probably ask your classes this or your students this. What's your definition of a leader?
A leader is someone who has a vision, but is interested beyond their own success into the group's success. They need to be flexible. They need to think about where the group is. Who's the guy that founded CD Baby? Derek, I can't remember his last name. Sivers. He has these beautiful talks on TED Talks. It's not me. It's TED Talks. Of course,
the other Ted.
Yeah, my kids say every time I talk it's a TED Talk.
Thanks for the time.
Derek Sivers. He did this talk on leadership, and it's how a movement gets started. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you haven't, it's worth the 3 minutes. And he shows this crazy guy at an outdoor concert just writhing badly to the music. And somebody joins him. And as Derek's doing the talk and the video is displayed, he says, now watch what happens. He goes, it's not to start a movement. The leader is crazy and out there by themselves, but it's not the leader. It's the first follower. And what the leader does with the first follower is joins back with them and sees what they're doing and encourages them to do their thing. And pretty soon this second person looks over and now another person joins another. Now, when about the fourth or fifth person comes running in past the camera into the scene, he says, now we have a movement. And then you see this whole group of people running in. And he says, now is the time, we've reached the tipping point where if you hurry, you'll be in the in-group. But if you're late, you're out. You're not in the in-group. And he's, at the end of it, he says, notice what about that leadership is over-glamorized. It was really the first follower and the leader embracing the followers. So I don't know, was that a roundabout answer to your question?
Yeah, no, I think that's great because the idea of I've always had that philosophy of lead by respect and example, but you can't. But like you're saying with the other dancer, you know, working with that follower and bringing them into it and working together as a team. No, it's exactly what I'm just lost for words right now.
It's about us. It's not about,
it's a we thing and not an I thing.
Yeah. You get self-centered leaders and that might work for a while, but it won't have endurance. It won't last.
Interesting. When you first started out in your career, was that what you planned on doing?
No, I was on a track coming out of graduate school. I went to Springfield College thinking I was going to be something like a counselor. I ended up in student personnel. And my first job out of graduate school, I was living in a dormitory in the middle of Vermont. And when I say the middle of Vermont, I mean nowhere in Vermont.
In the woods?
Yeah, Randolph Center at Vermont Technical College. And I ended up being the housing director and the psych instructor there. And it was just a complete evolution that I began to discover, I always have had this inclination towards teaching, but I didn't want to necessarily be a high school teacher like my brothers. So I started out doing the leadership, being the housing director, but that involved doing some leading and teaching and mentoring and coaching. And then that led me to the University of Vermont and things just kept evolving. And then I found out I can be entertaining as a speaker.
Okay.
Through the juggling. But before that, I discovered ropes courses. And
what's a ropes course?
A ropes course. So think challenge course. There's these escape rooms now, but before that, there were these things. You go outdoors and you have to get everybody across the poison peanut butter bog of eternal stench. But you can't touch the ground, and there's a rope hanging there with a loop in the bottom. And how do you get your group across? And there's a whole series of these challenges. I could go into the long, boring history of them, but
I don't think it'd be boring.
Well, thanks. They are a fun way to teach because normally when you go into a classroom, we've developed this whole mentality that learning happens inside four walls with a ceiling and a floor and chairs, and kids sit in and we tell them things and then they can regurgitate it back on a multi question test. But learning never happened that way before. And so taking someone out and putting a challenge to them and then seeing how they do it on the ropes course. How are you going to get the group across this? Or how are you going to suspend something? Or how are you going to move your group from point A to point B with this bucket of water without spilling any water? How are you going to do that? And then watching how they work with it. And then the real art of teaching is seeing whatever they do, as I mentioned before, is meeting them where they are and recognizing where they are, what skills have you seen, good or bad, and then getting them to think back about what worked and what didn't work, and having them see what the next step might be in their own evolution. And that's a real, I had a wonderful teacher in Vermont by the name of Paul Kempner, who is very different than me. Paul is very reflective and very quiet and very outdoorsy. And we formed this partnership. He mentored me basically over a summer I knew nothing about ropes courses, but I knew how to interact with people, so he thought. And through the summer, I started out just setting up the equipment and watching how he led a group. And then he'd let me lead 1 through the day, and then 2. And by the end of the summer, he was following me along, and the group thought literally I was teaching him. And that was not what was happening. But that's the definition of a leader.
Wow.
They thought I was leading the group, and that was so not true. But from that point on, I was sort of Mr. I can talk, and Paul is Mr. Reflective. And I learned a lot from him.
That's interesting that you learn a lot from someone who is the exact opposite. Whereas a lot of times you would think, I learned from someone who I'm a lot like they do the things the same way I do them. And so there's that connection and it's easier to learn, but you've got more knowledge out of someone who approached things completely differently.
Yeah.
Which I like.
And that completely changed the arc of my career in terms of how to work with people. So if I do a talk now, it has to involve something. The guy that I saw do the first time I got interested in juggling, Randy Judkins, he said, if the audience doesn't have any skin in the game, they don't really have any reason to pay attention. So in teaching or doing a talk, there has to be some point in there where you have the group use what you've been talking about so that they have some, I really do have to pay attention moments, or now I have to use this. And then how you react to it, like when you're teaching or when you're leading, it's kind of the same thing. It's not if they make mistakes, it's when they make mistakes. It's how you treat them that will determine whether they stay engaged or whether they think you're a nasty SOB, that they think more about what they did as opposed to what you did to them. So I find it funny that teaching and leading have so many parallels like that. I never really considered that, but it is true. When I was in high school, I was in this organization called the Civil Air Patrol, which was, an auxiliary of the Air Force. And at the time, I really wanted to be in the military. I was like, I wanted to go to Annapolis and all that kind of stuff. Needless to say, it didn't happen. But at the time when I was learning about leadership, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of different styles of leadership, and some of them are more along the lines of the military type of leadership, and then others are a little bit more subdued or a little bit easier, I guess. I don't know what the word is, but there's got to be some things that are consistent throughout. Yes, there are things consistent throughout. I'm a Hersey Blanchard guy. I don't know if those names ring any bells. I don't
Not at all, but I would love to know why.
But I bet if you heard the title of the book, The 1 Minute Manager, that was all the rage at the end of the 70s and the early 80s, they wrote it. And they were at The Ohio State University when they discovered, I'm making air quotes, discovered this. And this is not new. So yes, I teach situational leadership now, and it's so applicable, and you're exactly spot on. There are different types of leadership, but it depends, again, on where the person is. So, you mentioned the military. When I teach situational leadership, I always ask, is there anybody in here that's been in the military? And while the numbers have dwindled, there still are some folks that have been in there. And I've had some wonderful, wonderful reactions from folks. And I'll say, when you first went in the military, how old were you? And one guy said, I was 16 or I was 18. It's like, okay, when you were 18, did you know how to do your personal hygiene and brush your teeth? And my favorite answer was, well, I thought I did. But I found out that once you cover the bristles, and this guy said he was in the Marines, he said, you put it in the mouth, and the sergeant called out in cadence, up, down, up, down, up, down, switch. And if I'm teaching this, I'm doing it with the hoorahs and the, not that I was in the military, but I've heard enough of them talk about it. And then the sergeant would have them stand in formation and personally inspect every one of their mouths to make sure that they had, after they chewed the tablet, like the nuns did to me, that there was no tartar left. Because you're not allowed to damage that because that's United States Marine Corps property, right? So if you look at that, that's very, very controlling. But that's what the military is trying to do, is to get you to understand there is a way to do this and there are ways not to do it. And you're not allowed to fail. The drill sergeant is not going to let you fail. How many, did you know how to make a bed? Well, I thought I did, but we got several do-overs.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay. But there seemed to always be, or almost always be, a test that they had to pass that once they figured out what that test was, wouldn't you flip that quarter before the sergeant came and make sure that it was going to pass inspection?
Right.
So now you've changed where you are. So now the sergeant's behavior changed. So to a person, when I ask these military folks about leadership, how many hours a day did you see your drill instructor the first 2 weeks of boot camp? One guy said 23. No, he slept. I dreamt about him too. So 24 hours a day, so it's like they're always there.
Yeah.
How many hours did you see them the last week of boot camp? That was very different.
Yeah.
So the military completely understands that. And so the leadership of the drill instructors does evolve and change over time, even through a short boot camp. And the reason I laughed at the Hersey Blanchard saying they discovered this is when I learned how to about situational leadership, I was told to go watch the movie with Gregory Peck called 12 O'Clock High. Uh-huh. And when my wife went through her training, she was in the Air Force Reserve for 8 years, and she went in as a captain. She down in, I think she went to Mississippi, they had her watch 12 O'Clock High. So when in that movie that was made in like 1947 or something, you watch General Savage, played by Gregory Peck, take over this air command group that's supposed to leave from Britain and go bomb in Germany, and they're losing a lot of planes, and he's supposed to go in and fix everything. He goes in and he goes into what Hersey Blanchard would call Style 1. He's going to tell you what to do. He's going to do, and he's going to watch you do it, and he's going to make sure you make no mistakes. From point A, he walks onto that base, or is driven on the base. He is in that Style 1. And then he goes into coaching, and then he goes into supporting, and then he goes into delegating it by the end of it. He goes through the whole evolution in 1947 that the writers must have known about leadership.
Right.
Long before the 70s.
Right.
And I can't believe they made it up. Good leadership has always been good leadership. This is not new.
Yeah.
So,
it's just a matter of who put it down in a book first.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. To get boring with the leadership stuff, the leader changes who they are depending on where the person is. First question is, do they know how to do it? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the skill? They might know how to do it, but not be able to do it yet. So you have to work with that. But that's one thing. Do they have the knowledge? And then once they have the knowledge and skill, the second question you ask yourself is, do they think they can do it? Somebody who doesn't know anything about a job, you watch a juggler juggling. Well, how hard could it be? That idiot can do it.
Right.
Right.
Until you try.
I've had people watch me do some of my tricks, sort of like some of the juggling stuff. And they're like, well, that can't be that hard because you're doing it. Look at you. And they can't do it. Yeah. It's like, well, you could if you spent the time in it. So, the knowledge and the skill. And so that person that looks at it and says, oh yeah, I can do that. That's not even important because they've never tried it. You've never seen them do it. So until they do it, they're what you would call an enthused rookie. They don't even know what they don't know. So you have to treat them and give the whole secret of situational leadership, the Hersey Blanchard folks, knock on wood, if they don't get mad at me, is to give the person what they can't give themselves, knowledge and skill, or belief that they can do it, the self-confidence. When you've got somebody that's good and know they're good, get out of their way.
Yeah.
Get out of their way. Let them be great.
Where's the cutoff though for knowing that you're good and getting too full of yourself and becoming
Yeah.
a real pain in the ass.
So there, when I teach this, it's sort of like a little bell curve you go through with someone, and it doesn't always work one way. It's not when somebody's good and they stay good forever. They might slide back down. But you're watching for those two things. Do they have the skill and knowledge, and do they believe in themselves? So the pattern is they don't know what they don't know, so you give them direction. But you don't give them any support, no cheerleading for them, no patting them on the back and say, oh, you're going to get it. But once they figure out, we start learning something new. Like, remember back when you were driving a car for the first time, you got your learner's permit, you get behind the wheel of the car. I still cringe because I can feel my mother, Alberta, smacking my right shoulder because I'd reach over with my left foot to hit the brake. Because that's what I did on the lawnmower.
Right.
It's like, no, whack, use your right foot to do both. Okay, how do you do everything at once? So once you get to that point, you realize, oh my gosh, I don't have all the skills I thought I had, and I am over my head. So the leader needs to subtly change, and they still don't know enough to be able to figure it out on their own, but you can ask them questions, and when they start getting things right, you can say, yeah, you knew that. So you slowly start building their self-confidence. And as their answers come back more and more complete, now you can change your style from coaching them, which is giving them both direction and support, to saying, all right, take this, here's a project for you to work on, something like that, and bring it back and tell me what your game plan is. Don't start it, just come back and lay it out for me, how would you go about doing this? And when their game plan comes back as good as, or probably even better than you could do after a while, now you've gotten to the point where, you've encouraged them all along that point because you're letting them do the work. You're not telling them how to do it. And you kept encouraging them when it got more and more, well, what would you do next? What would you do next? What if you had to focus on that? And now, once they come back as good as you can step out of it because they don't need to know they're good. You've told them. And now hopefully they've internalized that.
Yeah.
And if something starts going wrong somewhere around later on, their mother-in-law gets stuck on a roof or their cat drives a car off a cliff or something, you can tell I've said these things in classes before, right? You slide back one step you move forward one step at a time in your leadership, your 4 options. There's more than 4 options, but Terry Blanchard's 4 options. And you slide back one step. So if you're delegating, you don't go back and telling them everything what to do. That's insulting. You don't go back and coach them. That's insulting. You go to them and say, hey, I know you can do this. I know you know how to figure this out. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's none of my business, but I trust that you're going to sort this out. And a lot of times it'll sort itself out. If it doesn't, then you might have to get more involved. But you step back in one step at a time, too. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. What do you do with people who, well, I'm going to have to cut this out because I completely lost my question.
Oh, sorry. I sometimes have that effect on people.
So I'm sure you're familiar with the mastermind group, right? The idea of having people around you who are smarter than you, who have a lot of different, specialities and expertise in different things. And together you make a formidable team, right? Like, there was this, it's a story that's in Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, where he says one of the newspapers wrote that Henry Ford was an imbecile or that he was an uneducated fool. And so he brought a suit against them for libel, and they had a hearing or a trial or whatever. And he said, the lawyer got up and said, he asked him a bunch of questions like, who is this in history and what was that? And how do you do this? Things that you learn in school, because I guess he didn't get past 8th grade or something like that. And he said, why would I bother filling my mind with all of that stuff when I can push a button on my desk and 5 people can come here and answer that question?
Right. Yeah. There's in the summer, up until last summer, hopefully this summer, but maybe virtually, I do a high school leadership program for the Rotary of Western New York here. And we get 25 students in it, and I give them a book to look at. It's called Radical Careering. And it's just 100 short little sayings or thoughts about your career and their career, probably more than mine, given my age and their age. But one of them is strive to be the dumbest person in the room. You don't get better at something if you always play it with people that you can beat. Because every once in a while you have to go out and get humbled, or at least pushed and challenged. With juggling, I walk into a gym, and it's been the truth from the very beginning. I'm probably not the worst one in the room. I'm almost definitely not the best one in the room. That's just not going to happen. So you look at people that are doing things that you can't do yet, and it's like, well, how do you get there? How did you figure that out? Or is there something you're doing that's how you get better.
You brought up the word challenges or challenging.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to what would you say was one of your most significant challenges in your life? I know that's like kind of a big question, but
wow.
Or at least one that comes to mind.
Having kids, being married, not that it's hard being married, but it's...
But it's all a challenge.
The long-term relationships. Challenges come in all sorts of manners.
So let's say professionally then, your professional challenge.
Boy, the two things that pop into my head. One, when I got to the University of Vermont, I was working as a career counselor. And then after about a year and a half of that, I went out looking around UVM for something else. So I applied and somehow convinced them that I could be the director of evening and summer division continuing education. Mm-hmm. And at the time that was doing 3 semesters a year of classes for the University of Vermont and putting out a catalog 3 times a year. It took me 9 months to figure out what was going on. I would go home every day and say to my wife, I'd say, Jube, I have no idea how you keep everything straight. And because there's 3 waves that are crashing on the beach of this semester starting and classes running and a catalog being produced. I had no idea of how to manage that, let alone what was going to happen next. But I had some good coaches there. They taught me about tickler files. If there's something that happens, write it down, put it in the file on a date that'll come back to you on that date so you don't forget it. So I still do that, like on my iPhone. If there's something I have to do or that's due, I'll put it out like 3-4 months in advance, that I need to start thinking about or working on that. And that was a tough job. And then I moved from doing the evening and summer stuff over to the non-credit side. And then that was just fun. We did the same thing, 3 catalogs a year, but we could do anything we wanted. We weren't bound by whatever professors wanted to teach.
Do you find yourself having a creative outlet in your performing? Is that your creative outlet? Or do you need a creative outlet?
I always have a creative outlet. When I'm doing a talk or I'm doing a series of workshops, I'm entertaining hopefully the group, but I'm certainly entertaining myself. Mm-hmm. There's always some interactive thing that I mentioned before. So something that it's not just me presenting, hopefully in a humorous way, but it's me getting the group to use the skills, and then I have to pay attention to what they're doing so I know how to debrief that and facilitate that conversation. So that's always interesting. And that's creative because I never know where the group's going to go. And believe me, there are many things that can happen with these games, good and bad. And it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of this one? I've had people get really mad and sometimes mad at me because of the games and the way they went. And so far, knock on wood, it's all worked out. And then I discovered the juggling along the way. So I will do probably some performing, some routine that has a teaching point that we can then talk about. But then if I'm doing a show, then there's always some sort of teaching that's in it. I kind of like the idea that, teach your audience something they probably didn't know. Like, with juggling, that's easy. There's so many things. Did you know that until 1947, juggling and magic were literally one and the same thing? There was no difference between the two. At the IBM convention in Pittsburgh in 1947, the jugglers went their own way.
They broke off, they split off and formed their own thing.
Yeah, at the IBM meeting, the International Brotherhood of Magicians.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's
I'm
different.
like,
yeah, not the
business machines?
Yeah, not them, but, yeah, so, I mean, it's really
So they
weird.
formed a revolt.
You go back and look at stuff before 1947 and they call somebody a magician or a juggler. You're not really sure until you get a description of what their act was, what they were really doing. It's weird.
Well, I mean, juggling is like magic, I guess, to some people. They're like, look at what they can do with that.
I think so. Are you giving me a segue to talk about my show that's coming up?
Yes, I am.
Well, the Pittsburgh Fringe Fest, virtual Fringe Fest, will be happening May 6th through 9th. And I've pre-recorded my Almost Magic show because juggling is almost magic. And
Is that what it's called, the Almost Magic Show?
It's called Almost Magic. So
That's awesome.
I open with a sequence of magic tricks, and I am a very bad magician. And things seemingly things just don't go right. So I'm a juggler. I'm not a magician.
That's great. So you've been doing Fringe Fest for a while now, huh?
Yeah, I got started here whenever it started here in Rochester. Was it 2011 or 2000? Must have been 2011 because this is the 10th one, right?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in that area.
Yeah, in one way, shape, or form. I've been in all of them here. Then I was in the Ithaca Fringe Fest for 2 years till it went away. And then last year when Pittsburgh Fringe Fest, I got myself into the Pittsburgh Fringe Fest because my oldest daughter was at Carnegie Mellon at the time and was a first-year student. And so I signed up for that. And then she was kind enough to bring some of her friends who I got involved in playing some of the games on stage and being in the show. And then last year, when it didn't happen in real life, but virtually, I pre-recorded a show, and I'm doing that again this year for them. And then I did the Tucson Fringe Fest earlier this year with a pre-recorded show, and they awarded me the best circus slash variety slash magic act. And I think they made it up basically. I don't know why I needed an award or they gave me an award, but it was very nice of them.
That's cool.
I might have been the only circus magic
The only
variety
one?
show in the Tucson Fringe Fest. But
What do you think the future? What's the future going to be for Fringe Fests here? They're not. Because this is when they submit, right? This is around this time, around April or something?
yeah, it's around this time. I think they're going to start it up in May from what I've heard. They just had a Zoom meeting where you could Zoom in and see it. And Erica was on with several other people, Erica Fee, the executive director, and other folks. So I think they're going to open it up in May. I think what they're doing is reducing the number of people in the venue according to the state requirements, which is normal. And if the show wants to, they can simulcast it or live stream it. So, I mean, that would make sense. You could buy a ticket if you wanted to go to the theater, or you could buy a ticket if you wanted to watch it at home and do it that way. So,
Right. And Fringe Fest, remember that Rockvox Recording and Production will live stream your events.
All right. Well, we may have to talk.
When I worked in radio, I really loved getting the pass for the Fringe Fest and going and popping into all the different shows and stuff. It's such a good time, and it really makes me appreciate the variety of talent that is in Rochester, but just all of the different things that people can do and find a way to make it interesting for a crowd and to perform and to make people smile and feel good and entertain them. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean,
and we are so, I don't know if all of us, I'm sure not all of us, but we appreciate what a gem this Rochester Fringe Fest is. Mm-hmm. So I didn't go to Tucson, but I can tell you Tucson Fringe is much smaller. I've been in the Pittsburgh Fringe Fest and had people go, oh, Pittsburgh, that's a big city. Pittsburgh Fringe is a 10th of the size of the Rochester Fringe
wow.
Fest. Rochester Fringe is in like the top, I want to say 3 Fringe Fests in this country. It is just a model.
Was it one of the first?
It's not one of the first. Fringe has been around for like 75, 76 years from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Is it the same? Is it the same like company kind of thing, or
no
troupe or whatever?
No, all the different areas run their own Fringe Fest, and there's different models. I think the Rochester Fringe Fest is sort of on like the Edinburgh Fringe Fest, where the performers have to get their own venue. The Fringe sort of is just this umbrella, and then the venues get to select their own performers. The Fringe here is unusual in that there are national or international acts that come in. It's not just local talent. It's people come in from all over to be in this Fringe Fest, and it is big.
Yeah,
and it is well respected. And they have done just such a tremendous job. And the free outdoor events that are humongous.
Oh yeah, I know.
That's not normal.
Really?
Other fringes don't do things like that.
Huh?
Yeah. This is special.
Are you gonna be in this year's?
I'm knocking on wood. I plan to be. I probably shouldn't say this. The Pittsburgh Fringe Fest has sort of been my lead in to the Rochester Fringe Fest, that I get to pitch an idea, and Pittsburgh Fringe Fest has picked it up. So like this year it was the Almost Magic show. I get to run it, and then I get to look at it, and then I get to tweak it. So the one I just recorded was 27 minutes long. Well, if I'm going to do a Rochester Fringe Fest in front of a live audience, I want it to be more like 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If I do 40, 45 or somewhere in that range. So now I get to look at what I did for Pittsburgh Fringe Fest, and I get to tweak it and I get to expand it. And there's so much more that I can get into with Almost Magic that I can play with. And yeah.
Well, that's very cool.
I hope to do that, but I have to be picked up by a venue.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like the venues, because right now if you go to a movie theater, like when we opened our film last week, it was 25%.
Yeah,
and then 2-3 days later they changed it to 33%, and it's kind of a weird arbitrary number, but I feel like by September, October, is that usually when the Fringe Fest is?
Yeah, it'll be like the third week in September in that time frame.
But maybe by that time, it's going to be, it might not be at full 100%, but it might be in the 70s or 80s, so that would be better.
Yeah, it would be better. I've had a connection with the Muck over the years, and I know right now, I think their capacity is just under 90, and so if they have to do the percentage of the capacity, that takes them down to 24, 25 people in the audience.
Yeah, which
for my shows, okay, that's fun. We can have fun with 20, 25 people. I'm okay with that.
Not a great business model, though.
For them, it's not a great business model. But then to live stream it out would be fun.
Yeah.
But I just did something, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. It's the first live thing I've done in 11 months. I went up to La Marquita up in the neighborhoods up in the north part of Rochester, and they're running a Puerto Rican festival and having that on Sundays. And so I was out there and doing some juggling and ball spinning, and boy, being in front of a live audience is so much more fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's okay to do a pre-recorded show, but it's
nothing like the rush you get.
No, because when I do a pre-recorded show, I don't know if I'm telling tales out of school. I do it in my studio, my garage, and I have big drapes in the back, so most of the backdrop is black. But I do it dumb. There's nothing happening other than my juggling and my speaking, and then afterwards I can add in the music and I can add in. And
it dumb. I like that.
So I'm just doing it where I'm having a positive blathering. I'm just talking to myself. Basically, I ask the audience questions, and I assume they've answered something, and I just run with that. Who's a famous magician? Harry Houdini. Really? He's been dead for 100 years. So it's just not the same.
Well. I'm looking forward to when you are playing in front of a crowd, because I'll be there for sure. Excellent. And thank you for coming in and blathering with me today. It's been great to get to know you and to find out what you're, just scratch the surface about what you're all about. And we'll be on the lookout for. Is there a way that people can get in touch with you or can find you have a website or anything like that?
Sure, I have a website, a couple of websites.
Websites.
Doesn't everybody have a couple of websites?
Yes, I think so.
My business website for the leadership presentations and keynotes would be at tedbaumhauer.com. And once you can spell Ted Baumhauer, then you can pretty much do anything.
You can spell anything.
Yeah. For the show stuff, it's Red Tie Variety. I have this affinity for red bow ties.
I love it.
So Red Tie Variety seems to be easier to remember and spell. So redtievariety.com. I'm on Facebook with both of those.
Awesome.
That's how to get me.
It's been a lot of fun.
I've had fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. I still don't know why, but thank you.
Ted Baumhauer, thank you.